Hi, friends. This is Sudeshna from Book Reading with Sammy. I'm very excited today to introduce you to Christy Mandin, and she has her new book, Millie Fleur's Poison Garden. And we are going to talk a little bit about the book, about her, and about her being an author.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
So, we have a few questions for you. If you're ready, we can start with it.
Okay, sounds good.
Sure. Okay. And the first one is, why children books? Is
Well,
there a special reason?
yeah, that's a good question. So I never really grew out of picture books. I've always loved picture books. The picture book format appeals to me so much because it's so visual in nature. Like I just really love illustrators and illustrations and but I really like writing picture books because they're kind of sneaky. A lot of times they kind of get cast off as this like childish thing, but picture books hold big ideas. And they're like oftentimes like a window for a child, or a mirror.
Hmm.
So I like that. I like that it might be like one of my books might be a child's first like real like entry into a new idea, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and they're also a bit of a challenge for me, and I like a challenge
Hmm.
because a picture book, is short form and very limited amount of words. And so you have to get in, make your point, get out,
Yeah.
and I'm such a chatterbox that it makes me practice really figuring out what I want to say.
Mhm.
Um, and tighten it up and really make every word count. So that's why picture books for me.
That's wonderful. Talking about picture books, so do you have any favorite author from your childhood? Any favorite
Yeah,
books?
yeah. So I have frog and toad knuckle tattoos. So it would probably be terrible if I didn't say Arnold Lobel first. Um, but I also love Virginia Lee Burton and Robert McCloskey. And then, of course, when I was older, middle grade, or like late elementary, maybe, uh,
Hmm.
fourth, fifth grade, I started with R.L. Stein, and, all the Goosebumps.
Hmm.
Um, so, yeah.
That's great. Um, Talking about visualizing, when you write a story, how do you visualize your characters?
So the short answer to that is I don't. And people are always kind of surprised by that, but I think I've heard more and more illustrators talk about this, now that I'm kind of like immersed in publishing and I've gotten to meet other people. Um, but I have aphantasia, which is the inability to form visual images in my
Hmm.
brain. So things like meditation or like mindful like thinking practices have never worked for me because, a lot of times they tell you like close your eyes and imagine a beach. Well, I know what a beach looks like because I've been there, but when I close my eyes, it's just black. And there's varying levels of aphantasia. So black being like level 0, and then shades of gray up to color, and then like moving almost movie images. That would be like a photographic memory. So mine is just black. So when I start to draw, a lot of times who shows up on the page isn't who I'm looking for. And so it might be good, like to look at and say like, oh, it's a good character. It is, but
Hmm.
it's not them. And so sometimes it's a little frustrating because I know it's not them, but I don't know. I have to like keep going to try to figure out. And when the character finally shows up on the page, I'm like, oh, there you are. Took you long enough, Um, but I didn't know that everybody didn't think that way
Hmm.
until I heard a talk from Glenn Keane, and he is the illustrator of The Little Mermaid. He's the creator for Disney's Little Mermaid, that character.
Hmm.
And he has the same thing. And when
Oh.
he was describing it, I was like, wait, you mean people can actually see pictures like in their head? Like that's so wild to me. And I realized like, oh, that's me. I just didn't know I was different. So
Mhm.
so the short answer is I don't. I don't think
So when you're writing a story, what do you feel is the hardest part?
mm, it's the cursed middle. It's always the middle. So like I feel like building that tension and interest in the middle is the hardest part. Like that's where a story can really just fall apart for me. Like
Mhm.
I can know where my character is starting from and where I want them to end up, but that path that they take to get from point A to point B, there's a million different ways you could do that, and I get hung up in the middle a lot of times.
Mhm. Yeah, that
First
so
middle.
yeah. And how do you think, like, how do you think your young readers, your readers connect, how do you connect to them?
Well, I have a 17-year-old, a 14-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 5-year-old. So, and I don't know if you've had a conversation with a pre-K or kindergartner anytime recently, but they are brutally honest. And
Yeah.
so I think a lot of times I connect by listening to what they have to say,
Mm-hmm.
and the things that are, I mean, a 5-year-old says some of the craziest things. So I try to pay attention to what kind of makes them light up. And then of course, like when I go to schools and stuff, that's an easy way to find out like what's working and what's not. A K through 3 group, if a joke doesn't land, they are just not going to give you any like grace. They just are going to sit there. They're not going to laugh. They're not going to give you a courtesy laugh or anything. So, so I think I connect that way. And just trying to remember what I felt like as a kid, what things concerned me as a kid as best as I can.
So tell us about the book, about, Millie Fleur's Poison
Sure.
Garden.
Yeah, so Millie Fleur is an eccentric little girl, and she moves to the rather like humdrum town of Garden Glen, where every house and every yard is exactly the same. And she plants a wild and weird garden. And
Mhm.
the local Rosebud Club is all in a tizzy. They don't like it, and they demand that she mow it down. But she pays no attention to their disapproval, and she sets out to find people who will appreciate what's growing in her garden.
That's wonderful. We love reading the book, and we'll do a book reading, for our friends, on the channel. Uh, and is there somebody that who inspired you for the character of Millie?
So for the character, so usually I don't set out to like um really know what I'm doing when I write a story. When I do these interviews, people are always like, like, what's your process? Um, so for the actual character, I didn't think so when I originally sat down to write it. She was just a
Mhm.
character I'd created. For the garden, it was inspired by an actual real life poison garden in England. I read about that garden in an article, and I found out this duchess at this castle had planted, she collected like 100 varieties or whatever of poisonous, deadly, toxic plants, and created something different than all the other gardens in England. And I thought that was cool. And so that directly inspired writing the book.
Mhm.
But when people ask me if Millie Fleur is based on someone, my first instinct is to say no, but that wouldn't be totally true because when I got to the end of the book, I realized I'd actually put myself in the story. And
Mhm.
so I think Millie Fleur is who I wish I would have been as a kid.
So Millie Fleur has another book, right? Millie
Yes.
Fleur saves the night that's coming up next year.
Yeah,
Um,
that's next summer.
uh,
Yeah.
do
Um,
you want to share a little bit
yeah.
about the new book?
Yeah, so in book one, if Garden Glen was afraid of things that were different, then in book two, they're absolutely afraid of the dark. And so every house and every yard, as soon as the sun goes down, is lit up like the noonday sun. And Millie Fleur misses the dark. And she's not seen any of her nighttime friends since she's moved to Garden Glen. And so she sets out to show Garden Glen that the dark is not scary, that there's actually some
Oh.
really amazing things that you can find in the dark if you're brave enough to turn out your light. And book two, just like book one, has back matter that tells you about some things that you can find in the night that I think are pretty amazing.
That's wonderful. Can't wait to read that new book. And you know, we you're an author, you write books, but there's also Jim and Lucky and Jim's
Yes,
cleanup club. So if you can share a little bit about that.
sure. Yeah. So my very first picture book that I ever wrote is called Lucky, and it's about a pearl whose shell home gets crushed by ocean trash. And she has to set out on an adventure to find a new home. And that book also has educational back matter. And I wrote that book when we lived in Florida. We actually
Mhm.
lived on a canal that connected to a 100-acre lake. It was huge.
Wow.
Uh, the lake was dead. It was considered a dead lake from agricultural runoff and pollution. And in the 7 years that we lived there, the city invested millions in cleaning up this huge lake. And I think it was maybe like $5 or $7 million to clean up this lake. And we watched it go from black sludge, like truly terrible
Hmm.
situation. Like it was dead, it was anaerobic, nothing could live there. Um, to teeming with life, huge snails like the size of your fist, and fish, alligators that were longer than the boats that went out there. So like 18-foot alligators.
Oh.
This they had completely rehabbed this lake. And so I created the cleanup club to go along with the book to show kids that little acts of service in your community really makes a difference, because even if you don't live on the water, everything goes back to the ocean.
Yes.
Even if you live in a desert, you have a watershed. And so it's important to know where your water comes from, where your trash goes, because nothing, we always, the trash goes away, but where does it go to?
Yeah.
And so Lucky and Jim's Cleanup Club, it's an interactive online collection of resources that kids
Mhm.
can click through, videos and different activities for like citizen science, and they can earn badges along the way that are printable. And at the very end, they can organize their own community cleanup. So it was a way to give kids autonomy and agency over the environments that they live in, even if it's just their backyard.
Mhm. Thank you. That's really amazing.
Oh, thank you.
And we have one last question for you.
Okay.
Do you have any advice for upcoming, children book authors?
Oh, yes, that's always the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I know it's a popular question, um, but I don't know if I'll ever feel really confident in how I tend to answer it. Because there's so much noise and information, and everybody has tips and tricks. And it's hard sometimes to know what to use and what to set aside, especially when you're first getting started. Except maybe to say that it's easy to get caught up in the rules, the rules of publishing, the rules of querying an agent, the rules of writing and editing. Um, and I have broken just about all of those rules and still ended up here. That's not to say you should, it's just to say that it's proof that what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for another.
Mhm.
And that there I wish that there was a guidebook. Like, I am definitely a rules person. I wish there was a guidebook for getting published, or the right way to do things. I wish there was a formula, but it is a very subjective industry, and it will break your heart if you tie up your self-worth in it. So make the thing that you just simply cannot go another day without making, like the thing that's in your heart, the thing that is clawing at you to get out, make that thing, put it out into the world, and then get to cracking making the next thing. Because if you spend a lot of time worried that you'll never make it, it makes it so much harder to create, so and once you've made it and put it out into the world, it's not even yours anymore and you have no control over it. So there is a freedom in that, you
Yeah.
make the thing, you put it out into the world, and you just keep getting better every time you make a new thing. So that's my best advice.
Thank you so much. And we would love to hear a little bit of the book if you can read it to our viewers.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Let's make sure that we can see here. Let me tilt this down just a bit. Okay. Millie Fleur's Poison Garden. Written by me, illustrated by me. Please do not feed the plants. Garden Glen was a place of sameness. Prim pastel houses, each one like the next, line the streets of Garden Glen like candies in a box. Their windows were spotless, their hedges perfectly pruned, their shutters hung straight and true. Every house and yard in Garden Glen was flawless, with not a blade of grass out of place. Except for one tumble-down house on a scruffy hill at the edge of town. Rejected and excluded, it stood lifeless, with no one to love it, until Millie Fleur LeFay came to town. Millie Fleur's new house was marvelous, but it was missing something. It didn't quite feel like home yet. We can fix that, her mom said, pulling a surprise from her pocket. Seeds from Millie Fleur's old garden. She got straight to work. Millie Fleur's garden grew fast and wild. Fanged fairy moss, glowing jack-in-the-bush, sore toothwort, tentacled tansy, grumpy gillyflower. Garden Glen's Rosebud Club was not happy about Millie Fleur's new garden. It's odd, said a man in a rather common sport coat. It's unruly, said a lady in a stiffly starched dress. Appalling, bellowed Colonel Stick in the Mud. The president of the Rosebud Club was determined to root out Millie Fleur's garden. This won't do. According to our rules, your garden is unacceptable. We simply cannot have this poisonous mess in our town. But it's not poisonous, Millie Fleur scowled. It's just not like yours. Millie Fleur didn't understand why the club was so upset about what she grew in her garden. Your garden is different from anything they've ever seen before, her mother told her. Some people are scared of things that are different. Maybe I should plant a few roses, Millie Fleur asked. People here seem to like that sort of thing. Only if roses make you happy, her mother said. That night, Millie Fleur couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, thinking about her beloved sneezing stickyweed, her grumpy gillyflower, your bookstore, to see what happens next.
Thank you so much, Christy. It was
Yeah,
wonderful having you.
awesome.
Thank you.